Okay, so now we're thinking about how our government works. The government's set up by the Constitution. The Constitution is the law of the land. And the Constitution has a few parts. We're not going to write them down here. We're going to get to this in just a moment. But we should at least mention this. There's the Preamble of the Constitution that sets up the themes and the ideals in the document, in the Constitution. There's a number of articles, and in the articles 1 through 3 establish the separation of powers into 3 branches, and we're going to look at that in a moment. 4 to 6 establish the federal arrangement, federal system of government, and this is the federal system. We're going to talk about this in just a moment. And the last article, right, number 7, explains how the Constitution was to be ratified. And there are 27 amendments to the Constitution, and we're going to look at those as well. Right? So that's just very briefly how the Constitution is organized. This is just a little chart where we can look at the different levels of government. Right? The federal system means that power is separated into the 3 levels, and each level is responsible for different things. But there's also some overlap across levels. Okay, the federal system is the federal level is usually the most powerful, but sometimes, and it really just depends on what we're talking about, but sometimes the local level is felt the most. Right? I mean, so if I'm going to build a house, the rules and the ordinances and things like that at the local level, I'm going to feel that the most. But for my income taxes, I'm going to feel it at the federal level the most. All right. So the federal level does things like it's responsible for things like taxes and military, and foreign policy. The Supreme Court resolves disputes between or among states. All right, that's at the federal level, and there's more. You have a handout for this, like you do for everything else. You have a handout, and there's more examples listed on that handout in a box just like this. All right, so be sure that you take a look at that. Okay. The state, education, criminal laws, and transportation, the local level, water, trash, sewer, schools, property, right? So if you're going to build a house or buy property or something like that, most of those ordinances and laws are at the local level. But as we said, there's also some overlap. So some states have income taxes. Texas doesn't, but a lot of states, most states do. So it's taxes at the federal level and the state level, but there's also a sales tax, and that's a state tax and a local tax. Both levels get a percentage of sales tax. There's a property tax, and that's a local tax, a property tax. There's also school taxes, right? So taxes aren't just at the federal level. They're often thought to be, but they're at all 3 levels. Education is at multiple levels, right? So the local level, schools are run locally, but states are responsible for curriculum. In Texas, we have the TEKS. Okay, that's a state level decision. The Department of Education influences through giving grants. Okay, but it's an indirect influence, but it's a powerful influence over education and education policy and education research. So those are some. Hold on, one more. Military. Right, so the Army and the Armed Forces at the federal level, but states have National Guard units, so that's at the state level, right? And criminal laws, well, that's the state level, but it's also local, such as jaywalking or something like that. That's parking, that's the local level. Things like murder and burglary and crimes like that, that's decided at the state level. Other crimes, kidnapping, that's a federal crime. So even the criminal laws are divided across the 3 levels, right? And we can come up with other examples if we wanted to, if we thought about this enough. So those are the 3 levels. You might see a question on the exam, perhaps about you know, what is each level responsible for, but I think it's more likely, if you see a question, that you'll see one about what they have in common, what areas different levels have in common. And we just went over a few examples of that. In the next video, we're going to look at the 3 branches of government, how these different levels are divided into 3 different branches, and we'll take a look at that next.